Welcome to InnerTV. I'm your host, Althea Provost, and my guest today is Paul Selig, author medium whose channeled books and programs offer personal insight to one's divine nature. Welcome, Paul, to InnerTV.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm most interested in your Upper Room, and I know it's a book that you don't have out yet, but if we could take this to a higher room conversation, I'm interested in it because in my own inner travels, I've reached a place of where there's no you, no me, no we, no story, and then I drop back down into consciousness like everybody else, and then I work my way back up, and it seems to be like an escalator de-escalator moment. Feel to me, 7 channeled books feel to me like it's a stair-step process back into the upper room, and you go back to the books and you work those programs like a 12-step to move your consciousness forward. Is that accurate, would you say?
I think it's a way of looking at it. I certainly didn't know it when the books were being delivered and are being delivered, but there certainly is a progression, and each book really has the seed of the book that will follow in it, because they really are taking us on a journey.
It's certainly taking us on a journey. It's taking us on a Melchizedek journey. And I know that that's one of your guides. You've mentioned it. And so I did a little background on who Melchizedek is. I'm not a biblical scholar. In fact, I'm not religious whatsoever. My background is UFOs and gray mythical men. So having said that, as I was going through some of the documentaries on Melchizedek, mainly the Yale Divinitary School, it says he's a priest and a king. So here's this first book, you could say, that's adding to your books. It's someone who is ordained by God, who has a kingship, like a righteousness, is from Salem. He would be a peace king. So he has both righteousness and peace. How does that fit into the upper room? How are we looking at Melchizedek today, not so much as a person, a biblical person, but more like a format, a platform, a frame would be?
I have no idea, and I really don't even know that I can answer it. I mean, the first time I heard, when the guide introduced himself to me, back in my early 30s, I first heard the priest, and then I heard the high priest. And, other people had said, you're working with Melchizedek. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not interested at all in the names and the attachment to the names, because that gets very laden with narrative and often with ego. So I call them the guides only because my ex said, ask the guides this, ask the guides that. That's how they got the name. I'm also not religious and not a biblical scholar. So you probably know as much about Melchizedek as I do, truthfully. My encounters with the being that I think of as the primary guide, that have been visual, and they've only been a few, have been remarkable for me personally, because of the wisdom and the love that comes through this being. But when they talk about this, they say, if you wish to call us something, you may call us Melchizedek. And then they explain it as a collective of teachers.
That's how I look at it.
That's how I experience it, and that's fine with me.
But if you're pulling from the Most High, someone so teachership at like the master level, the PhDs, you could say, of interplanetary consciousness, of consciousness evolution, you yourself then have to be going through your own initiations, because you're bringing that consciousness in. So therefore you're stair-stepping, just as you're writing these books, through the evolution, right?
Yes and no. Primarily my job here, I'm not the teacher, I'm the radio that this broadcast comes through. And that's a clear distinction that I make. I'm not a guru. I'm not a spiritual teacher. I have no desire to be either of those things. I am willing at this point to show up and sit in the chair and be party to this, because I'm fascinated by it. And I also think I asked for it in my youth. And the guide said, this was actually prearranged.
Absolutely.
Before this life. But, that said, I get Simonized, as each book comes through. I have my stuff come up. The book that's coming out next, which is Alchemy, which will be out in in August, which is actually a book that I just read once it was in the publisher's, proofs. I sat down and read the whole thing because normally, those books are spoken into a recorder and then they're sent off to a transcriptionist. And I'll read the lectures, but I don't see the entire book until the whole book is done. And we don't edit anything, maybe 3 words in an entire book that I mispronounced or clearly stepped on in my speech. So my experience tends to be that I'm retaining about 1/3 of the information from every lecture. That's about what I get it. But I don't get, because I'm also hearing in phrases. I hear phrase, I whisper and repeat, phrase, phrase, phrase. And I've said it's like reading 1,000 fortune cookies, one after the other after the other. So I'm hearing the independent phrase without the larger context. So I don't even know what the title of the next book is. And I'm supposed to, if the guides are correct, I'll start delivering that in June. I don't know the title.
Crazy.
I have some vague idea about where they're going because of what they've been lecturing on, but I don't know if that will end up being the book. So yes, I'm in the process of this, but I don't claim to be an enlightened being. I've got my own baggage, and as I continue this work, it continues to show up, and I have to deal with it just like the rest of us.
And Paul, I hear you, but you got a T1 line, and I'm most interested in consciousness. So I would say, like, here we're at a point, like you said, humanity's at a crossroads. That's a good one. And I'm looking at immortality. I'm looking at what would it be like for divine consciousness to come in more fully in all the people who are here, or at least people who are interested in that type of conscious evolution as a life path. I know that as you just said, you're really just the radio receiver, but it's like if one has the radio receiver to someone who possibly can change skin suits at will, come into interdimensional time space, and literally be a woman, be a man, be a CFO if they want to, whatever it is that they're looking at to move the ball along of consciousness. That's how I see whoever you're channeling. That's what drew me to you.
I see.
Because I see someone who is, as a clairvoyant, when I look at the constructions when you're speaking, especially when you're doing your invocation, I see like what I would call the Christic formula or the geometry, and it's exquisite. It's absolutely exquisite. I don't see that often.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I love it when clairvoyants come to my work. I've had people show up because I don't see the guides when I'm working, and I've had mediums show up and say, well, there are 6 monks standing behind you while you're working.
Oh, that's interesting.
And a very tall guide, and the one that I've experienced and other people have seen him for years, is very tall with a big, big hat, and that's the one I think of as the prime guide. But I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that others have these experiences, can affirm them. The guides say that they teach in a one-room schoolhouse, which I appreciate. And they say that they're dealing with all of their students at the levels that they can be taught. And so people are having different experiences of this work. And I'm not, they're teaching alchemy now. I mean, that's the next book that's out there. And I don't know where they go beyond that, or in fact, if there is another book after that, I'll know when they tell me, I suppose. I assume there are. But I feel like this book that's coming next is likely the end of the series. So, which is fine. I mean, there should be another one.
Creation from like, because you use she a lot. So you're obviously bringing in, where the biblical text, it's he, because that was the time.
Yeah.
And now we're moving into creatorship, like as in divine feminine, you could say it. But again, it's almost like, how do we use language and create and create on a higher level here without the stories that we've had from the past of who we are and how we break down spiritual consciousness. Those they're heavy laden words. How do we break them down? And it blows my mind that your guide uses biblical words. You know,
Well, they're reclaiming them, and they've been clear about that. I mean, they're reclaiming language. They talk about the Christ, and they say that the Christ is the aspect of the Creator that seeks realization in material form. It's the seed of the divine. And I can get behind that. I understand that. And their metaphors continue. You know, you become the expression of the Christ, or the true self, or the monad. They use all different terms. You know, the first book, I Am the Word, was dictated exclusively with the male pronoun. And that book was dictated. I was on the phone with somebody who was, you know, taking notes, and I was recording.
Wow.
And this was, you know, I mean, I wasn't expecting to channel a book. The guide said, "We have a book to write. If you take 2 weeks, we'll do it." I said, "Okay."
Wow.
And that was it. It took 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks and 2 days because I took 2 days off. So Victoria Nelson was on the phone, and Victoria is a scholar, and she said at a certain point, I think it was towards the end of the dictation, and it wasn't as part of a session, she objected to the male pronoun being used. And the guide said, you know, we're speaking to humanity, and humanity doesn't have a gender. But they did start becoming inclusive of the female pronoun. They never stopped it. They took the note. And it's one of the only times I've ever noticed that. You see, they're not interested in the politics of the moment. I don't think
No, they're not.
less. And
No, and I don't think you are, and neither am I.
Yeah.
But I am interested in that genderless, timeless, immortal self that we are, and how we can anchor that in our daily lives more and more. You know, it's like, how do you bust down the paradigm? How do you break out of the box?
Well, the guides talk about this, and it's not about busting it out and breaking it down, which all imply that there's got to be enormous resistance to it, or that it's got to be a battle, and we can invoke that one if we want to and have those experiences. The guides work with attunements. The attunements, they say, are, you know, energetic adjustments. They're tuning the radios that we are to be able to play the higher broadcast. One of the claims they work with, and this was in the Book of Freedom, is the claim, "I am free, I am free, I am free." And they talk about becoming free of the narratives of history and the conditioning of history and the belief in separation, all of these things that we've been in agreement to. You know, we were born into structures that claim these things. We went, well, that must be so. They say the sky is blue. That looks like, I think, what blue is. But blue's an idea. You know what I mean? You can,
Absolutely.
you know. So I am free is what actually moves us beyond what they say, the limitations that the lower octave or the lower vibrational system that we operate through, to begin to move to what they call the upper room. And they say that's the octave above. They say everything exists in octaves. And we collectively are having this one experience, and they are seeking to bring us to an awareness of who we are beyond that. So when you go to the claim, "I am free," it's not spoken at the level of personality. It's not spoken as Paul who wants to get a better spiritual life, or Paul who needs to go on a diet, or Paul who, you know, wishes he was with his dog. You know, I mean, those are all parts of who I am.
Right.
But they're being spoken or invoked at the level of the divine self, or the indwelling God. And so that aspect of self knows it, he, she, it is free, and consequently it's always true. So that's my understanding of how that shift begins to happen. But, you know, there's a very big difference between parroting words and aligning to the truth of them.
Absolutely.
And that's what the guides are inviting us to do.
Well, I also think that that's why they go on about resistance. So the resistance is the fear, the separation, but it's like a well-honed habit. And so these attunements, I say, are, like you said, even though they're coming from the higher version of oneself, it's a different habit. It's like adorning a different habit, a different garment of light, you could say.
Absolutely right.
But I want to talk to you a little bit about alchemy, because you said you retaining about a third of it. With alchemy, to me, that is conscious evolution in a nutshell, because you're using, whether it's your words, actions, or deeds, you're utilizing who you are on that upper room to move the vibration. That means you're moving vibration of anything that has been damned, any aspect of us that, you know, we damned ourselves, any aspect on the planet that is willing to move into evolutionary consciousness. What about certain aspects and beings on the planet that don't want to move, and it's their right, but don't want to move into evolution?
Well, we have free will. The guides talk about that at length. They talk about aligning the will to the higher will. You're not, running away from your own accountability and responsibility. The guides won't do any of the work with any of us unless we're in agreement to it. But what they are inviting us to do is they put it this way: you can't lift the evil man to the upper room because you have made him evil. You've aligned to that human being at that level through your judgment or through morality or whatever. And so the challenge then becomes to realize, which is to know the man as of source, even when he doesn't, she doesn't, or whatever he, she represents is the antithesis of what you think the divine is. Because the guides say, who you put in darkness, what you put in darkness calls you to the darkness. So finally, it's an act that one does, I suspect, for the liberation not only of the other, but primarily of the self. Because if I'm attaching through what I guess the guides would call damnation, they say what you damn damns you back, what you bless blesses you. I can do that. They say self-righteousness is always the small self.
Absolutely.
So we get to be on our high horse and say, well, look at those people. They don't want to shift and they're not doing what we want.
Right.
And we can do that, but we're then no better than they are. Then
That's
it's hypocrisy, right. And that's the hypocrisy of most religion. So it becomes inclusive anyway, in spite of what we think, in spite of what we were taught, in spite of even what the group think might happen to be at the moment. And it's very challenging. I know it well.
Yeah, so let's just say that we've shifted up to that upper room, and we are seeing, we've moved past that 99 to 100% of seeing everyone as divine source, which they are. But like, there's no framework anymore for disassociation or separation. Then what?
Oh, I'm not there yet, and I haven't delivered that book yet. I think that's the next book, truthfully. The next book, if I'm understanding where they're taking us, they're working on unity consciousness, really. Now, you see, I think part of when I was first opening up psychically and spiritually, I didn't really want to be here. I would have preferred to be anywhere else. And I was on this journey. And, this isn't about escaping the current reality. It's about re-knowing and re-seeing the current reality, which is a vastly different act. I don't get that in the upper room you don't have to pay your bills or your kid doesn't get addicted to drugs. I don't get that those things happen. I do get that it's how we attend to our experience here from a different level of consciousness and the impact of our vibrational field in a higher octave, which they say by presence of being transforms what it encounters. The challenge with a lot of this stuff, and unfortunately, I think a fair amount of New Age thinking, is that it's either about becoming special or getting what we think we should have. And that's still programming from the small self, it's the idea. And that's where we have to move beyond. And that's where you move beyond the narrative of what it's supposed to look like. So I just finished a 5-day course online. They've never done 5 days online, and they channeled. Then it was an advanced group because there were people that have been coming to my events for years, and one of my events. They've all been canceled because of the virus, so we met online, and they really were talking about this process of being assumed by the true self and what that does, but also, it really is, feet on the ground, head in the clouds. You're still here, and I get that. So what is it like to be at that level of union? They said once in a lecture, which surprised me, and it was in a workshop many years ago, and only because somebody asked, they said, are there any truly enlightened beings on the planet? And they said, yeah, there are like 4 of them, and they're like living in caves.
That's what my next question was about to ask.
And I said it, and I was immediately mortified because I said, that sounds crazy. And I was doing an interview with somebody else, and he asked the same question. And I said, listen, this is what they're saying. And then they said it again. And he laughed, and they said, that's exactly what Ram Dass says. And I went, okay, at least somebody else is conferring this.
I was, there's a few caves on the planet that you don't have access to, right? Well, one of my girlfriends went to one, and she said that there was a image on the ceiling of the cave. And I said, don't tell me. Oh my gosh, don't tell me. I know exactly what it is. And I think it's like, we might come in, and I'm not saying that this is me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like, there's certain symbologies that you have that will take you to a cave. And I've known people who've, jettisoned out of their body and into a cave, and it always goes back to a cave. I take people on Starseed Adventures, and I've taken many people to a sacred cave of initiation. I think it has to do with, and this is just my opinion, based on nothing scientific, but when you're in a cave, you're really not around any electromagnetic smog or signals and things like that, and you can truly sit in that divine seat without being interrupted. And so it's not surprising that you said that there's 4. Would Melchizedek, and I know you're not so much interested in Melchizedek, but obviously I am, would Melchizedek come back and embody, in our lifetime?
When I work, there's an attunement that the guides do, where they have me stand in front of people individually, and they look deep into everybody's eyes, and the guides step in. They step in first, or he steps in first, and then he claims them as they truly are, beyond the ideas. And there's usually one of the claims from the teachings. You are free, you are free, you are free, whatever it is. And I'm told, and I haven't seen it, my eyes, which are dark hazel, run bright, bright blue. There's a whole physical thing that happens when this happens. And I understand what it feels like to be at that level.
Wow.
Because there is no fear, and there is only deep love and deep compassion. And I don't operate there 7 days a week, and maybe one day I'll get to. I would love that, truthfully. But I know what that's like. I think the idea of a singular embodiment is an old paradigm.
Oh, good.
I really don't think that that's how it happens. I think that's, listen, if somebody shows up and says, hi, everybody, I'm the Virgin Mary, come back, and you better believe it, I'm probably going to look at her a little askance. Yeah. But I also think that there's a deep egoic attachment to specialness around some of this stuff.
I agree with you. But the reason I brought that question up is because on your last, I think you had like 7,000 people, Humanity's at a crossroads. Someone had asked about Melchizedek, a woman, and hello to her if she ever listens. But I thought that it was brilliant that she asked, because you had responded that if Melchizedek did want to come in, would. And I was thinking to myself, probably what the guides or the master teachers, if you could call it that, or guides in generic, do is that they come in through embodiment and through channeled processes where I
suppose that's true. I think that there's, channeling is a word that is used now that has been, but the act of it has been present for thousands of years. I mean, the guides say in 1 or 2 of the books that you become an oracle. And an oracle is, an old word. Again, we don't think about going to a psychic. They're not teaching people how to be psychic. They're moving people to their own claircognizance, their own true knowing, because they say the true self knows, the small self thinks. So the idea of embodiment at this level, they're inviting us to embody at the level of the divine self, which is in fact the Christ. That's really what it is. And Melchizedek, if you look at the lineage, the name Melchizedek is often overshadowing Christ. And some people believe that they were the same being.
The harbinger of a Christ.
Yeah. But this is information. And honestly, if the guides want to sit down and dictate a book on this kind of information through me, I'd be interested in hearing it.
Me too.
They're teachers, and what they care about is our own evolution, and this is what their focus of study is. And I'm really there to take the dictation, not to come at them with, when I interrupt the teachings, which is often, they will answer the questions. Right. And I only do that when what they're saying feels too far out for me to handle. Because I don't want to be party to any teaching ever that is, fear-based, destructive, or misleading. So if it's bugging me, I'm going to ask about it. And, unfortunately encounter people who say, well, this is what I channel, so this is always true. And you've got to know what your source is, and you've got to, you've got to be operating. I mean, there are always red lights. I'm sure you know them, but when somebody's channeling fear, or telling people to be afraid, that's low vibrational stuff,
Sure.
And we can go there, but it's an awful place to get stuck in. Awful, awful.
It's an awful place to be stuck in, but we're responsible for that stuck. So it's like,
Yeah.
if you want to, if you want to bring out the mop and bucket for your lifetime,
Yeah, exactly.
have fun with that. I don't. So I think, as a clairvoyant, as a child, I used to see a lot of things, precognition things, and I wouldn't say anything, partly because I didn't want to be responsible for someone's level of consciousness who misconstrued what I was saying. And I'm assuming you're doing the same. This conversation I'm having with you is really to Melchizedek as your channel. I don't listen to channeled people, to be honest. As a rule, I don't really.
Yeah, I don't really either. So
yeah, it's not really my dealio, but I can say that there's certain things that I have an interest in. Not intellectually, spiritually, I have an interest in, and I call to the divine to provide me those answers. And if it comes through Melchizedek, that's great. I don't have a relationship to Melchizedek, although they were saying to me that your books and your work take people to freedom, or what you would call the Christ self. For me, that would just be freedom from attachments, all the limitations that have kept us from experiencing our immortal, eternal selves.
I agree.
Well, there we have it.
Yeah.
So if you ever did sit post this event and ask about Melchizedek, I am interested more so on their ability, obviously where there is no time and they're coming in and out and threading time with understandings and teachings that can be embodied and understood at the time in which they're coming into, so various planes of existence. And that we're moving from, like I said, my work is like, you got Melchizedek, I got gray men. It's like, what do you do when you get what you do? But it's all leading to that evolutionary consciousness of, okay, if we're immortal, if we're timeless beings, if we move in and out of embodiment, we take different skin suits. I'm a woman, you're a man, this type of thing. We do it for whatever reason that we have in our life script. Then boots on the ground, yes, we're here to do that, but we're also here to even move beyond that.
At the level that we can, at the level that we can and at the level that we're able. I can't tell you, I run into people occasionally who are very excited by the work, and then they want to dive in, but their purpose is, I want to walk on water.
Oh.
And I think, but that's not what's being taught here, but that's the interpretation of it.
Right.
So the idea, the guides began teaching in the Book of Freedom. Maybe it was in the Book of Truth, actually, was really interesting. It was an interesting book and an interesting event that happened as they were teaching it. They began to work after a few books where they were talking about the deconstruction of how we see things and how things are named. They started moving to everything is energy in a way that was sort of, tangible and tactile. And that was the claim, I know what I am in truth. And also the claim, I know what you are in truth, which was palpable. And they say, they would have people do it in pairs and groups, and you would claim it for another. You would literally feel the energy roll back at you. It was a whole escalation of vibration.
Wow.
And one of the things about what the guides teach is it's not informational, it's vibrational.
Right,
so
agreed.
All of this stuff is actually happening at a level. So their work with the body and form, manifest form, they say everything is one note. They said there is one note playing in the entire universe, one note. And, you can call it the word if you want. In the beginning was the word, but it's the idea that there's one energy or tone that is in articulation, is everything in manifestation.
Wow.
Everything is of this one source. And that's how you move to unity. Now, because everything is in tone and in scale, you have lower and higher. And you also have multiple octaves, or I suppose you could say multiple dimensions. And so our attachment to experiencing things through linear time, which is what we're agreeing to when we come into this plane, when it operates this way, is providing us experience that's highly valuable, and we're here to learn through it. So, in terms of where this all goes, they are talking about the reforming of matter, but they're talking of this. So the challenge with some of this stuff is then people say, well, okay, I'm going to turn water into wine. It becomes this act of sorcery. They guys say, we're not teaching sorcery. And they're also saying that, there has been in the spiritual communities an attachment to stuff, as if, this is a big catalog for things. But you also have to look, I think, at, because I've been through this, so I understand it, the attachment to gifts, the attachment to, I can't tell you, because I want to be clairvoyant. People say to me all the time, I want to be a channel. And I go, why do you want to do that?
Well, because we're on the opposite end of it. I'm like, it's when you're clairvoyant, there was times I'm like, please don't show me that. Please don't. I don't want the responsibility. I don't want to have to move through what that means. You know what I mean?
Well, but I understand the impulse, because my visual sense was the last sense that really developed. I could see things with my eyes open, but with my eyes closed, I wasn't getting information. And then bang, it started to come. And I was very excited by it. And I was relieved, because it's an incredibly useful tool when I work. But the point of it is that, yes, these things exist. Yes, they can be claimed. But this, some of the most evolved people I've ever met, spiritually, would never call themselves psychic, but they have a very highly developed knowing and wisdom that comes. So the attachment to the other things, in some ways it becomes a little bit high school. But I can say that, but I've been at this for a long time now. I started opening up when I was 25. I'm 58. And I was doing groups in my apartment for almost 20 years before anybody knew who the hell I was. And I wasn't looking to be known for this. In fact, I had a life I liked as a college teacher. And, I'm surprised I'm not doing that anymore, but this is what I've chosen and have agreed to. So the process that one undergoes as one is developing, I think, is important. Some of us, and probably you, because you came in with this stuff, had some of these abilities with you when you were born. And I had psychic experiences as a kid, but nothing that I would have made me go, wow, look at this, I'm a psychic. It wasn't until I started to open up in my 20s and I started seeing, orbs and rods and, little lightning bugs go off over people, going, what the hell is this? But for me, it was important because I had been raised an atheist or pretty close. And I needed phenomena of some kind to give me some sense of validation, And when I started opening up to hear clairaudiently, I was volunteering. I was doing energy work. I was doing healing work. I'd studied at a center for people that were basically dying of AIDS. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic. And there was, Western medicine was doing very little. So these little centers started to pop up. And I was volunteering. But I started to hear things for people who were there. And so my abilities psychically or clairaudiently have really always been in service to others. It's not been for me. And the good news about that was I was able to get enough feedback to know that I was accurate. And I was like, oh, phew, okay. So then this is here. This is part of it. And these things, it's like if you're given a paint kit, these little watercolor set. And you know what the colors are, but how you begin to use them and develop with them, that's craft finally. And that's discernment and, all those things that I think come through application and
experience
patience.
And application and time.
And bumping into some big walls too. You know?
Well, it's your books talk about it being a test. It's a test because you're leaving, one aspect or one belief system or one, just like they say, like cities essentially can be a big hindrance to one's growth. Just because you have it doesn't necessarily mean that you're it, or you've arrived.
Yeah.
Like I said, we started this interview with consciousness, which I'm very interested in. And you mentioned one note. We'll probably end with this one, but with one note and that one octave is something that I experienced when I was on the open road, going back to Neolithic sites or back to a time when we had a matriarchal culture here on the planet. And they would create these rooms like an inner cave underground, you could say. They were underground, but cave-like. And they were attuned to a harmonic, sometimes varying degrees. And the oracle or the priest, I don't know if it was female, male, that really doesn't matter to me whatsoever, the gender, but likely female at the time, because that's our history tells us that. But they would sound. And they would create a sound, and this is what they would do for the transition of the body. So when someone was dying, they would move them from a lower octave, that density of our being, into the higher upper room. And so I think that this knowledge that you're speaking of, or that you're bringing in eventually, has always been here. I think we have remembered, or still remembering, that we worked with sound, light, and color to move the soul into the higher octave, into that higher plane of existence.
Agree.
And so when you ask Melchizedek, and I'm hoping you do, Paul, ask him or her or it, because it's eternal peace and it's righteousness. And I don't mean righteousness over others. I mean, like, just being at peace with one's gifts. And knowledge, to send a little insight my way. I would love for more insight on this because of my travels, because it has led to caves, it has led to vibration, it has led to the oracle, and I'm interested how it all fits together.
I don't understand the question, to be honest. I also, and I always say this, I never know if the guys are going to show up at an interview, and that's their call. I mean, once somebody at a book signing said, are the guys going to say something? And they said, yes, we are not the entertainment. And that was it for the night,
Thank you.
So they're there to teach.
They are.
Yeah. So I don't understand the question, though. So you're asking for insight into what?
On that higher vibrational sound, how they were utilizing sound.
They're saying sound is always present in all things. Everything is sound. Everything is sound or tone and can be understood this way and can be understood this way. The manifest world in density is still in sound, is still in sound. If you had no eyes and no understanding of what things look like, you still experience all things. You can still experience all things in their tone. In some ways, this is subjective. In some ways, this is subjective because you are the amplifier, and the receiver at the same time. So how one in low vibration experiences a high tone will be markedly different than the one who experiences the high from the high, than the one who experiences the high from the high. By our attunements, we support individuals, and then the collective, and activating and receiving in the high tone, but they must indeed acclimate to it, If you don't acclimate to it, you've experienced the sound, perhaps, you're not aligned to it, but you have not aligned to it. The process of alignment is a renegotiation of all the systems of being, the aspect of it that's already high, the aspect of you that is already high, and there is indeed an aspect of self that is already in highest, is called. And there is already an aspect of self that is in the highest of the high, that is in the highest of the high, is what is being addressed through these teachings, and what shepherds the lower forward, and what shepherds the lower forward. You can call it the I am self if you wish. You can call it the I am self if you wish, but that has been degraded by other teachings. And misuse. In fact, the true self, or monad or Christ, the eternal being that you are, the eternal being that you already knows itself beyond separation, already knows itself beyond separation. It's a great sound. It is a great sound, a wondrous sound, sound. To become that sound, and to become that sound is to sing that song, claim that tone for all you witness and see, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome. I'm surprised.
I'm very surprised, and I think it's interesting that they did use the word song.
They use it a lot. Yeah.
Do they?
Oh, yeah. It's in the very first book. The last chapter in the first book is when they started to address tone. With the ringing of the bells. But they're still doing that. In the last teaching they gave online, I think in the last 5 days, they ended with the ringing of the bells, again. And it's, again, the peal of the bell and what that does. When the church bell is rung, the whole town feels the vibration. And they talk about us becoming as the peal of the bell that lift to the source by nature of our presence and expression.
That explains it, because I did hear celestial sounds. It was like chimes. And I've been thinking about it ever since. And I've heard it a couple times, no more than that. But I was thinking to myself, it must be the vibrational attunement. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paul, for being on InnerTV. I'm very thankful for your time. I know I kind of battered you with your material, but
it's okay.
There's very few people that can speak on that topic with the divine discernment that you have.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
The platform that you offer. So if you'd like to know more about Paul, please visit paulselig.com. And once again, thank you, Paul, for being on InnerTV.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.